Welcome, everybody. Let me call the meeting to order. This is an open meeting of the Broadcasting Board of Governors being held in compliance with the Sunshine Act. A digital recording of the meeting will be available, as always, for on-demand viewing on the BBG website, www.bbg.gov. So before we get started, we want to start on a very sad note and kind of a sad personal note for all of us who've been sitting in this room for the past, for me, for the past 3.5 years, and kind of a constant presence in the room. We had 2 unexpected deaths in the BBG family over the last 2 weeks, which are shocking and saddening. 2 weeks ago, Ron Moore, VOA's television master control supervisor, passed away. Ron is remembered as someone who has always made sure that VOA puts the best broadcast quality possible. And Ron's death was followed by last week by somebody we all know well, Jeff Means. The board and I remember Jeff as an instrumental hand who helped us at board meetings, usually behind the scenes, setting up the podium, lapel mics, always quick with a joke. Whenever everything went right, we didn't talk to him. Whenever anything went wrong, we talked to him a lot. Both Jeff and Ron were integral members of the BBG family and consummate professionals. Above all else, they were wonderful people, friends to so many in the Cohen building. And sadly, the passings of Ron and Jeff came on the heels of 2 other deaths in the BBG family over the summer. Richard Hoffman in TSI and Robert Long, also in VOA. All 4 men were integral members of our team and consummate professionals. Above all else, they are all 4 wonderful people, friends to many of us, and we want to send our deepest condolences from the board and from our BBG family to their families and friends at this difficult time. So let's take a moment of silence to remember all 4 of our colleagues. So thank you. Tough note to start on. So we'll go right on to a happier note, which is threats to our journalists, which is always a happy moment in the meeting as well. I'm looking forward to not reading this someday, but so far that's been unsuccessful. So as you know, at the start of every board meeting, I do outline the ongoing threats to the press around the world as the staff prepares for me. And staff did not send me an audio recording, so I'm going to struggle with the names this time, but I will do my best. RFERL's correspondent in Turkmenistan, and Tom, wherever you are, you can help me. Sarpemad Napkolisiev. Okay, whatever Tom said. I announced it last time, I believe. He's still in detention following his arrest in July of 2015. And we, the members of the BBG, believe his imprisonment is grossly unlawful and demand his immediate release. Parbamed courageously reported on economic development, infrastructure, social services, and education in Turkmenistan's western regions. His goal was to inform citizens about challenges facing their communities and help them improve their lives. Unfortunately, Sarparmed is not an isolated case. In Somalia, a VOA journalist was among several reporters arrested by Kazmayo police on charges of, quote, creating chaos in the city. In addition, VOA's Kesmayo affiliate, Soyai Radio, was taken off the air. The journalists were later released without charge, and the stations have resumed their VOA broadcast. RFERL stringer Mykola Semena remains under house arrest in Crimea. In a joint appeal issued this month, the International Federation of Journalists and European Federation of Journalists called on Russian authorities to allow him to leave the peninsula to receive medical care. Tom, did I get that one right? Okay. And on August 18th, another RFERL employee, a freelancer, let's see, Tom, Islam Shikazadeh was detained briefly by plainclothes police in front of Baku's Court of Appeals while reporting on the arrest of an activist with the Azerbaijani youth group, NIDA. His phone was confiscated but later returned in damaged conditions. So there's many more that I could read. We focused on RFERL today, but obviously there's a lot of suppressions of press freedom around the world. So let's turn to the business before the board today. The presence of 5 or more governors satisfied the board's quorum requirement, and a quorum being present, the board may conduct business based on a majority vote. We actually had all the board members here for our briefings this morning, and Karen had to leave for some important business, but we have all the remaining board members here today, which is great. On September 13th, the board received by email materials for the consent agenda, which allowed sufficient time for all governors to review the agenda prior to this meeting. We did not receive any comments from any governors. The consent agenda includes the minutes from the last board meeting on June 23rd, resolutions honoring VOA's Diwa, Afan Oromo, and Tigrana, Kurundi, and keyword Wanda language services. Amanda, am I saying those right, wherever Amanda is? Yes, she says. And a resolution honoring the 20th anniversary of Radio Free Asia, which is kind of a big deal, Libby. So congratulations. At this time, I would like to ask if any governors have any comments on the consent agenda. Okay, anybody want to move we adopt the consent agenda? Move, Governor Armstrong. Is there a second? Second, Governor Crocker. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objections? The consent agenda passes. The board permits members of the public who register to attend open meetings the opportunity to speak for up to 3 minutes each. I understand we only one member of the public here today would like to make remarks. Adam, please come to the mic, and you're up. Go Trojans.
My name is Adam Clayton Powell III. I'm the president of the Public Diplomacy Council and director of Washington programs for the University of Southern California's Annenberg Center for Communication, Leadership, and Policy. The views I present today are my own and not those of these or any other organization. We in the United States will vote in November in a democratic election which presents as great a contrast, in this writer's opinion, as when Lyndon Johnson was challenged by Barry Goldwater in 1964. This week, UPI reported that its state-by-state survey indicated that if the election were held now, Donald Trump would win with 290 electoral votes. It is very, very close. So what does that mean for professionals in this room and for your organizations? After all, you have a very different task from those across town at the Washington Post and National Public Radio. The reason is simple. Your mandate is to explain America to the world. One requirement is to explain American democracy, and that is not easy. Our electoral college, the 50 different state election laws, the roles of private organizations, political parties in America are private organizations, not part of any government entity. These are all core subjects for you. But there is another role especially suited to those in this room and in your organizations, and that is to explain exactly what the next president of the United States, the next leader of the free world, will do. The candidates have said what they will do. You may or may not agree with them or with the way they said it, and they may or may not do what they say. But both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have made numerous specific promises about the way they will conduct foreign and domestic policy. To your credit, you have done some reporting along these lines. This morning, the VOA website posted a pair of stories on the way Trump and Clinton might govern based on their management histories in business and government, respectively. And RFERL posted excerpts of Monday's debate dealing with Russia and NATO of prime interest to its audience as indicators of future American policy toward that part of the world. But more broadly, and this will require reporting and analysis, what will happen after January 20th? One publication has tried to answer this question in some detail. It's the New Yorker magazine dated September 26th. You probably can't see the headline from here, but it says, President Trump, what would he do? And I understand they may be doing a similar one on Hillary Clinton to run before the election. Here is one excerpt. Trump could achieve many objectives on his own. A president has unilateral authority to renegotiate a nuclear deal with Iran, to order a ban on Muslims, and to direct the Justice Department to give priority to certain offenses. The article goes into much more detail, but even that single sentence contains a primer on American democracy that is almost entirely missing from our domestic media. And that is the core of your very mandate. You don't have the luxury of wasting time and resources on the trivial and the transient, the horse race and the cosmetics. It's essential for you, the messengers to the world of freedom and democracy, to tell the world exactly how our democracy works and what is at stake, and what specifically is at stake for the rest of the world in November's election. To paraphrase PBS's slogan, if you won't do it, who will? Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. So two unscripted comments before I pass it along to you, John, since we have a little bit of time today. First thing, just I don't usually comment on public speakers. We don't, as a board, generally as policy, comment on public speakers. But I would say that, you know, as we sit here in Washington D.C. in one of the most polarizing elections of our time, it is a weird thing to come to BBG and sit with this board, where literally if you put a camera on all of our interactions and ask somebody from Mars to determine who was Democrat and who was Republican, they would not succeed. So I think there's a feeling outside of Washington that things are very polarized, but certain places inside Washington, here between 3rd and 4th Street, they're not very polarized, and proud to be members of this board and members of this bipartisan board that actually acts bipartisan. So that's the first thing I would say. Second thing I'd say is I don't know, John, how long have you been here now? It feels like 5 years, a year. Feels like RFA has been here for 100 years, and when you take a step back and look at the two things, John, that you have done, managing is always about people, as we all know. It's not about the things you do; it's the people you hire to do great jobs. And there's two things happening at BBG, which because these meetings are now compressed, the public can't really see always. But first thing that's happening is we have probably the best team I've seen anywhere. Forget about government, non-government. We have you've really built an amazing team. It's like this morning we were hearing kind of content from one person after another, and each was more impressive than the next. And it's really amazing to look around the organization and see the quality of talent we have in this place. So thank you, and thanks for all the people that agreed to join John and the rest of the team in doing this. And then secondly, the collaboration that's happening. I get reports of the ICC and things happening. It's amazing when you work together. Nobody was working together when Matt and I first showed up here 3.5 years ago. The board was not setting a very good example, and the organization was following our example. And things have changed. So we have a lot of work to do. By the way, we are just getting started in what we have to do. We're not having the impact around the world that we need to have. But I feel better about the BBG today, as I sit here under your leadership, John, than I felt. And it's really because of the people around the room and around the table. Everybody's in the right seat in the boat, and everybody's pulling their oar, and we're going faster than we've ever gone. At least we're moving ahead, actually. So anyway, Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And we have had a chance to add some very strong executives, but we had a core group here as well that was excellent. I was very fortunate to join the core group here as well. So speaking of collaboration, I want to lead off the report with the ICC on a couple of areas of importance to the board. At our last board meeting, there were two specific requests. One was an update on the work we're doing covering issues related to women and girls around the world. And the second was an update on what we're doing in our work in confronting violent extremism. And so what I've done is I've asked the ICC to collaborate on this. And in the first instance, we'll talk about our coverage of women and girls. I'm going to ask Libby to cover it for the ICC, but she'll be speaking for the whole ICC. So all of the other brands, including hers, will be discussed. It's noted that communities where women and girls participate in civic life are safer, generally more stable, more equal, and ultimately are better partners for the United States. Unfortunately, this sort of equality is difficult in many of the markets where we operate. It's often the case that women and girls lack information on issues that matter to them, or they lack a platform to speak about those issues. In many cases, we are the only potential platform to give voice to the voiceless women. So we have a major role to play here, and Libby has a presentation that covers RFA, which has really been a leader among the ICC, and all of the other entities in the work we're doing in covering the issues related to women and girls. Libby?
Thank you, John. Obviously, we could talk about women and girls for a week, but I have 10 minutes, so I'll give it a shot. U.S. international media prioritizes reaching women and girls in our programming throughout the 5 entities. I have just picked some highlights for you. Much of this work focuses on empowering women and girls through engagement, awareness, education, entrepreneurial skills building, all kinds of things that will help empower women, and topics and formats that will engage women and resonate. MBN, I'd like to start with MBN. Because MBN has a unique opportunity and freedom to shed light on and address the marginalization of women and girls in the region, they focus on women's issues as a key theme, both in Alhora and Sawa. In a male-dominated society of MENA, the rights of women are so frequently disregarded that in some cases, a woman cannot travel by herself, she cannot make decisions about her own life, she's forced to undergo female circumcision, or young girls are married off to old men. Alhora and Radio Sawa's coverage tackles the issues facing women and girls in two major ways. One, shining a spotlight on the inequality of the region, which is a topic that's still not well covered there. And two, by highlighting female achievements in the Middle East and around the world, empowering women by showing them what they can do. Alhora has two programs that are dedicated to women. Women's Views, it's a weekly program that takes on how women are treated as second-class citizens in some MENA countries. And A Woman is Worth 100 Men, a weekly reality show that follows successful Egyptian women as they achieve their dreams and their careers and their families in an empowering program. One season is completed and one is about to start. MBN's research shows that women are engaging with these programs. In Iraq, 68% of women who have watched Alhora in the past week say the channel helps them form their opinions on important issues. And 68% say Alhora presents information that they could not get from any other media source. Turning now to the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. In Cuba, women and girls live in a world of pervasive gender-based discrimination, and OCB programming empowers women through engagement. Every weekday, Radio Marti broadcasts the nationally recognized radio program, Dr. Isabel. This program is hosted by Dr. Isabel Gomez Basals, a Cuban-born psychiatrist, educator, and specialist in domestic violence. She's known to her listeners as the Angel of the Radio. Dr. Isabel's program provides a platform to empower women to overcome obstacles. She engages with Cubans on the island through phone calls, emails, and Facebook, and she covers such topics like being a single parent, recognizing an abusive parent, recognizing sexual predators, how to deal with anxiety, self-esteem, and identifying good and bad influences in the world. Frankly, I think we could all use these programs. Daily morning program called With Our Own Voice is a program that allows Cuban audiences to have a frank dialogue on a variety of inspirational, aspirational, and educational topics aimed at Cuban women. Some recent topics include domestic violence in Cuba, how women in Cuba are using rap music to express themselves, and specific information about cardiac care for women. And this reflects the needs and the interests of the women on the island. 1-800 Online, which is played every day, reviews trending issues for everyday Cubans that have very little access to the internet. Guests and topics often address women's issues, empowerment, and interviews with women that have risen to the top of their fields, including a tech help small business owner, a female orchestral conductor, and small business jewelry designers who took their venture from black market to legitimate business. So these are inspirational stories on the island. Next, Voice of America. VOA's programming engages women and girl audiences and empowers their voices across its language services. Among the many, many regular programs at VOA, including programs in Dari, Pashto, and Persian, some highlights include VOA Haas's youth radio program. They use WhatsApp groups to reach women and incorporate their voices into the show. Is this right? Yes. In the face of cultural inhibition against women, they can contribute to the program on radio, Facebook, and Twitter. And female participants have told VOA that it's completely liberating for them to be included on the program and have a voice. A recent show covered the case of an abused 10-year-old who broke the silence on incessant sexual abuse on young girls. So these are very, very cutting-edge issues that are raised on the program. Tablet, VOA's very popular daily half-hour show, VOA Persian was the first news outlet in Iran to feature the story about Metra Hosseini, who is the first female long-distance passenger bus driver in Iran. Now, this is a country where men and women are very reluctant to get on a bus driven by a woman. But Tablet's exclusive story on this received 100,000 video views on Telegram, which is the most popular messaging site in Iran. VOA's Zimbabwe coverage on trafficking of women to Kuwait resulted in the expatriation of more than 30 Zimbabwe women who were trafficked to Kuwait and to the other Middle Eastern countries. These women informed the service that they learned ways to escape based on info they heard from the show. This is literally saving lives. And VOA's Dari Pashtu Radio airs weekly mixed-language call-in radio programs dedicated to the Afghan women. These are just a few examples of the many, many programs they do that change the audience in their countries. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. RFERL's South and Central Asian services report about women and violence against women as a key element in their mission to practice journalism. They treat women as equal players in their country's transition towards greater democracy and pluralism. NGOs have called Radio Mashal the first place they go when they need attention and support for a victim of domestic violence. Radio Mashal has 2 weekly radio programs uniquely dedicated to women's issues, including violence against women. One is a call-in health clinic intended to provide an opportunity for women, especially those who are confined or in remote areas, to seek and get health advice from a doctor. Mashal reports regularly on the tragic cases of acid attacks in Pakistan. One example of this was Noreen Jabbar's estranged ex-husband who threw acid in her face 2 years ago. Like hundreds of Pakistani women who have endured similar attacks, she suffered very disfiguring scars. But Noreen and many other victims have received medical care, training, and a route to financial independence, all thanks to a local entrepreneur, a woman, and her chain of beauty salons, which provides training and employment for these victims. Radio Afghanistan also reported on the case of Akhtara, a mother of 4 who was left severely scarred after her husband's killer threw acid in her face. Widowed and unemployed, she used to beg for money on the streets of Kabul, but a donation organized by RFERL's Radio Free Afghanistan helped keep Akhtara off the streets and her 4 children in school. Radio Free Europe's Radio Liberty's Radio Free Afghanistan aired video footage from an eyewitness that appears to show stoning of Rakshana, a 19-year-old Afghan woman who was stoned to death after being accused of having premarital sex with her 23-year-old fiancé. He was lashed. She was stoned to death. While onlookers were videotaping this on their phones, you could hear the sounds and the pitiful cries coming from a hole in the ground. This was very, very powerful. I also wanted to mention for Radio Azadi, it's one of the, Radio Azadi has defied the local customs in Afghanistan by hiring numerous women in its Kabul bureau. So that's an achievement and a demonstration of equality on the onset. But they also do a lot of portrayals of women in the news and coverage of violence against women as a standard policy, placing special emphasis on engaging women directly. Azadi journalist Malai Shirer moderates a Facebook page for women only that affords them a safe place to discuss domestic violence, street harassment, and other issues. This is so needed in these communities. Finally, Radio Free Asia. Focusing on marginalized and oppressed voices in unfree Asian countries, RFA devotes journalistic resources across all its language services to cover the plight of women and children, 2 groups disproportionately affected by oppression and injustice. Breaking Free is an award-winning ongoing multimedia documentary series on modern human slavery that explores sex trafficking, forced marriages, and abuse of female domestics working in Southeast Asian countries. Beyond reporting, RFA's recent educational anti-human trafficking comic book, published in Burmese and English, warns youth of the dangers of savvy human trafficking recruiters. You can pass this around. Thank you. Last year, RFA produced a widely downloaded ebook profiling many of Asia's unsung women's leaders. And by covering these crucial issues in an informative and accessible format, RFA fills a void by helping to break down the traditional societal barriers. Social media is an important avenue to connect with our younger generation. We can track it to some degree, through Facebook and YouTube, etc. But we focus on showcasing content featuring women and about women. So these are two examples. One is the Vietnamese service on a press conference with a woman of a monk who died in prison. This was widely shared in the country. And this is an example from the Vietnamese service, who is covering a famous woman. She's a land activist, and she was recently arrested and sent to trial. This piece caused a furor among Vietnam between fellow activists, dissidents, and bloggers. It just became a media issue. Again, like all BBG networks, connecting with the audience is essential. Producing educational games related to serious coverage topics is another way to reach younger people, especially young women and girls. For all of us at all of the BBG networks, we recognize that there's a need to go beyond news reports if we want to connect with the next generation of women and girls in the 21st century era of rapidly changing new media. The changes and innovations offer opportunity, but only as long as we can keep up. And complacency should never be allowed to distract us from the main goal, having an impact by informing audiences around the world who need us. Thank you.
Thank you, Libby. Thank you very much. Well done. And any comments, questions from the governors? So thanks again, Libby. So the other area is covering violent extremism, and that was a request made at the last board meeting as well. And I was actually impressed myself when I saw this first run-through at the work being done around the ICC. I've asked Brian Conniff to represent the ICC in this, and he'll be discussing the work done at all 5 entities. So, Brian, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, John. In the few minutes we have this afternoon, I will only be able to give you a brief overview, brief flavor of how the BBG networks cover violent extremism. But it's worthy to note that the approach used by each network varies depending on their mission, the conditions in their region, and the needs of their audience. We all take slightly different approaches to it. Additional detailed information and further examples are in your briefing book if you'd like to dig a little deeper. But I'd like to provide a few examples of what the various networks are doing on CVE. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Radio Mashal, a radio service that broadcasts in northwest Pakistan in Pashto, recently dedicated an hour to the friends and family of lawyers who were killed in a suicide attack in the capital of Pakistan's Baluchistan. To highlight extremist brutality, Marshall invited four of those families affected by this tragedy. The show was very emotional, particularly when family members were talking about how their children missed the murdered lawyers, particularly during the recent Eid holiday. VOA's Extremism Watch Desk produces as many as 50 items a day and up to 2 to 3 full-length stories scoured from regional publications in 12 different languages. Some recent specific examples of stories posted by the Watch Desk include informing a Virginia family that their son had joined ISIS, getting medical aid for a Yazidi woman, and prompting a businessman to send a boat to rescue 10,000 Somalis from Yemen. Bernard News, an online website operated by RFERL, has been making notable gains by filling a pressing need for objective, balanced journalism in the Asia region. Particularly in social media, Bernard News has recently seen and experienced significant jumps in Facebook content, engagement, and views. Bernard News breaks stories. It recently has talked about, done a breaking news story on the exploratory peace talks between the Thai government and the Muslim rebel groups. It has also been vigorously following up on the July 1 deadly terror attack in Bangladesh. Countering violent extremism is at the heart of MBN's mission. Al-Hur, Radio Sawa, and MBN's digital platforms have been engaged in CVE since the rise of extremism in the Middle East. I'd like to now play a brief video that gives you an overview of MBN's CVE activities.
Extremist ideology has spread throughout the Middle East with deadly results. Since this crisis emerged, Al-Hurra and Radio Sawa have provided a counter-narrative through their newscasts, discussion programs, and digital platforms, showing stories of religious tolerance, female empowerment, peaceful mediation, bringing together people to discuss their differences. The focus of the last year has been MBN's Raise Your Voice. Through television, radio, and digital platforms, Raise Your Voice encourages Iraqis to express their opinions and explore solutions that will contribute to a stable Iraq, providing a dialogue that challenges ISIL's violent propaganda. Al-Hurra's Raise Your Voice television programs highlight Iraqis working to improve the country. From Kurdistan, a show on the plurality in Iraq, a monthly town hall meeting where Iraqis can ask questions to political and civic leaders, and Delusional Paradise, showing eyewitness accounts of people and communities who have suffered at the hands of ISIL. Radio and television call-in programs engage Iraqis on topics such as rights of women, government corruption, and how to help displaced Iraqis. Each week, the Raise Your Voice website and Facebook page focus on a theme that centers on the underlying causes of extremism, resulting in frequent discussions among pro- and anti-ISIL supporters. Raise Your Voice, opening the door to dialogue and debate.
As you can see, one of the keys to our CVE strategy is interaction with the audience, particularly on the digital platform. Over the past year, we've experienced significant growth in our digital footprint. On Facebook alone, over the last year, we have just recently, last week, topped 1 billion video views. And perhaps most importantly is MBN's Facebook pages are now averaging nearly 250,000 comments per month, much of it on CVE activities. Specifically on Raise Your Voice, in the year that after it's been launched, it's gained this Facebook page has gained 1.2 million followers with 300,000 comments and 85,000 shares. But as we always like to say, statistics and reach don't tell the story. It's the impact that is important. So let me give you a few examples of Raise Your Voice impact. We recently heard from a female member of the audience in Hawija, an area controlled by ISIL, and she was a radio listener who was participating in the call-in show. And she says, "I live under the control of Daesh. I go upstairs to listen and participate in Raise Your Voice call-in show. If Daesh catches me, they will kill me." Raise Your Voice focuses heavily on the underlying causes of violent extremism, providing a platform for discussion and debate. Some of the topics range from women's rights, unemployment, government corruption, and the misinterpretation of Islam. Raise Your Voice is not an echo chamber. Both pro-ISIS and anti-ISIS sympathizers frequently join the discussion on our Facebook page. Recently, an ISIS supporter commented on the page and made the argument that ISIS follows the true Islamic ideology. And our moderator joined the conversation and provided an alternative point of view, posted links to literature that disputed the sympathizers' perspective, and other members of the audience also joined in. It was a discussion, it was a debate. Now, what is important about that is radicalization experts tell us that such online dialogue and debate encourages critical thinking and sparks discussion about violent extremism. 44% of all of Al-Hurra's viewers in Iraq say that they saw something on Al-Hurra, Iraq, which led them to think differently about ISIS. So I think that's a pretty significant example of impact. However, as the extremist propaganda changes and morphs given the circumstances and conditions in the field, MBN's approach continues to evolve. We are currently working on a new satire program that will show how comedians and satirists in 4 countries tackle the ISIS ideology. Another new series we're developing for Al-Hurra is called Life After Daesh, which will interview former ISIS fighters who have defected. And we're also working on a series of 80 online videos that will pit ISIS's interpretation of Islam against moderate Muslim clerics. Because of the success of Raise Your Voice in Iraq, we are now looking to replicate elements of the initiative in the Maghreb and possibly in Egypt in the future. So that's my report, John.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions, comments for Brian?
Question I have, Brian. I mean, obviously, this is now scratching the edge of a very complicated subject that probably would take years to discuss. But violent extremists are obviously don't come. You know, your report crossed a third of the globe from Indonesia to Northern Africa. Do we need to start tailoring things locally? How do we have research on whether different local messages make more sense in different places when you're talking about different types of extremism, or are we finding that general themes work across the entire region?
I haven't seen a general global study on that, but knowing what the other entities do, they are doing that. They are localizing, they're customizing their content. I know you do this in Central Asia, RFERL. There's certain strategies that ISIS or extremist group uses to prey on vulnerable people, and we know in our own region which are the elements that they prey on. So I think we already do that, but it will continue to morph. There people who study their ISIS propaganda, particularly in the Middle East, it's changed. The elements that they used as recently as a year ago, certainly 2 years ago, that they don't use now, because they have different objectives, and they go after somewhat of a different audience. So that's why we have to stay on top of it. You have to evolve. We study the engagement we get on Facebook to see what is resonating with people. What is it that people want to hear about? In fact, we do this one show. We borrowed from RFERL called Morning Papers on Radio Sawa. It's a terrific show that we just basically picked up and put on Radio Sawa. And what we do at least once a week is through Facebook Live, we do what we call an editorial meeting, and we ask them, what are the topics you want to talk about? What are the issues you want us to cover? And they come up with some terrific ideas, the things that we don't always think of. So having that interaction between the media, the broadcasters, and the audience, I think, keeps you on target for what that region is interested in.
Okay. Yes.
Connection with what you said, but the question is for Tom, mostly, I think. The issue of the violent extremism in the area of the former Soviet Union. That area provides now more fighters for ISIS than any other area except for the Arabic countries. Russian is the second most popular language of ISIS after Arabic. All kinds of things are happening, and there are various very fascinating and dangerous things going on. Are you addressing this in your? It's the Central Asian diaspora, migrant workers. Now the second generation problem, like we see in Europe. And of course, the indigenous radicalization on the margins of indigenous people, such as Tatars and Bashkirs.
Yes. Governor Aaron, we do devote a lot of attention to this. We have services for each one of the Central Asian countries. Extremism is a very important part of the agenda. And then also for the Southern Caucasus and for Central Russia, the Bashkir area. We have two hyperlocal sites which we have just opened within the past few months in Russian, one focused on the Bashkir region and one focused on the North Caucasus. And that's a huge theme for it. We think that these hyperlocal sites and our RFERLs.
What's hyperlocal?
Well, we mean it's focused on local news, not just of Russia, but of those regions. And the fact that RFERL is in basically the local news business means that we can really telescope now down in detail to those particular regions. It's also a good thing when you do local news to combat false narratives, because people can tell, since you're writing about local things, people can tell themselves if you're telling the truth or not.
Sure.
So it's a good force multiplier for us.
Sure. And of course,
Yes, we have services in each of those languages, and they're very much attuned to the CVE agenda.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Governor Aaron. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, please, Ken.
Let me ask Brian about, you talked about the Islamic radical who was on the Facebook page saying that Daesh was the real Islam. What percentage of people engaging on the Facebook pages are radicals, are they then swamped by responses from others, or how does that work?
It's a good question. The comments are so voluminous. We haven't had the time to sit there and I asked that question myself. I hear that some sympathizers frequently go. We have the way the Facebook page is set up for Raise Your Voice, we have a different topic every week, and some of the same sympathizers come back week after week with that subject. So they're the regulars, so to speak. They tend to be dwarfed by the supporters, but there are enough to make it a credible website, and I think that's why a lot of people come there. A website, a Facebook page, because if it's everyone saying saying the same thing, that they wouldn't come back. So there's enough debate, and the key that we have introduced to Raise Your Voice is the role of the moderator. I think this is the first time we've employed it in this large scale, and it really makes a difference. And we encourage actually the people to come in with different points of view. And we have some of that on the call-in show. We have a TV call-in show and we have a radio call-in show, and we get sympathizers from time to time. And it's a good opportunity for that discussion to be hung out there and sort of another alternative view provided. We think that's much more valuable than just one-way communication of Daesh is bad, Daesh is bad. We think this approach is a good one.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Thank you, Brian. So September 3rd of this month marked what might be looked back upon as the dawn of a new era at Voice of America. Two things came together in a very interesting way. First, the BBG mission, which is to, as you know, to inform, engage, and connect citizens around the world in the interest of democracy and freedom. And the VOA's mission, within that mission, which is to tell America's story. So on September 3rd, the Voice of America created a global town hall meeting between Somalia American citizens, the diaspora in Minneapolis, with Mogadishu in a town hall meeting across the globe involving the president of Somalia. And I'd like to ask Amanda Bennett to tell you about how that all worked out and how it might point to some of the future of the Voice of America. Amanda?
Thank you, John. Yes, it was a direct confluence of our mission to tell America's story, connect with diaspora populations in the United States and improve our coverage of diaspora populations, and to use our technology in novel ways. What we did is we went to Minneapolis, which has the largest Somali population outside of Somalia. We gathered 100 people there in a PBS studio that we had rented. We had a VOA moderator and 3 panelists, including the mother of a person who had been arrested for joining ISIS. And then we sent a technical team to Somalia. We had 250 people there in the audience and a VOA interviewer and the president of Somalia on the stage. The president of Somalia sat for 2 hours taking questions from both audiences while the Jumbotron in between flipped back and forth, so it gave everyone the impression of sitting in one giant room. So essentially there was a dialogue with the president of Somalia between the Somali community in the United States and the Somali community in Somalia. They discussed questions of radicalism, terrorism, security, youth education, and migrants. I'd like to now show you a brief clip from that experience.
idaacadda VOA waxay idiin soo bandhigaysaa kulan dadweyne oo looga hadlayo arrimaha dhallinyarada kaas oo ay fikrado iyo aragtiyo isku weydaarsanayaan dhallinyaro ku kala sugan Soomaaliya iyo weliba
Assalaamu calaykum magacayga waxaa la dhahaa
su'aasha waxaa waaye
VOA iyo Minneapolis
runtiisna waa macquul waad maadsantahay Minneapolis baan ku noqonaynaa Harun Macruuf
Mr. President, there are millions of kids and moms around the world who want to come and visit the capital for summer vacations, but our parents are afraid for our safety.
wiilka IDB-da maxaan ku raadaya
badan oo Soomaaliyeed ayaa meelo kala gedisan ka soo qoraya
ma sugtay su'aashayda labaad
stuudiyaha waxaa nagu weheliya in ka badan 100 qof oo Soomaali ah oo ka mid ah dadweynaha degan.
The engagement now exposed what's inside Somalia and exposed what's outside Somalia and having common understanding. This is a good opportunity and I'm very much grateful for the VOA to provide this opportunity for the Somali youth.
It was a really extraordinary event, and just so you know a little bit of the nature of the questions, the young boy you saw there asking a question of the president in Mogadishu said, Mr. President, I'm from a refugee camp. I have had no opportunity for education, no opportunity for health care. Mr. President, is that my divine fate? And the president answered him about what he was trying to do. We think we can do many more such events and using them in the not only diaspora but connecting technological communities in the United States with the appropriate audiences elsewhere. We think there's a huge opportunity for us going forward using this technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda, would you just audible here, but talk a little bit about your thinking in terms of telling America's story through the various diasporas in the United States? I think that's really interesting and unique.
So VOA's mission is very, very clear-cut. It's to tell America's story and to give objective news and information to people around the world who have no other access to it. We think one untouched, and not just untouched by the BBG, but untouched by virtually, for any media at all, opportunity is covering America's very rich and diverse diaspora community. It offers two possibilities. One is that, particularly when you're trying to connect with the most closed society on earth, it happens to be a very vibrant and vital pathway back to those countries. You may not be able to get into China easily, but you say something to somebody's Chinese kid who's in college, and you hear about back, and it's a highway for information back and forth. And the second thing is, if you ask our language services, of which there are 45, what their audiences are most concerned about in the United States is they desperately want to know, how are my people doing in your country? So if you want to not push your message uphill, but simply do good, objective, robust reporting, you will do good, objective, robust reporting on how these communities are doing in the United States, their pluses, their minuses, their successes, their failures, their issues. And that is incredibly interesting to the countries that we're broadcasting into, and frankly, incredibly instructive. So we think that since there is almost no authentic diaspora coverage, Western newspapers and news organizations drop in and out when there's news stories, but there's nothing in which there's a continuing robust coverage, and we think that's a huge opportunity for us.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, turning now to the Cuba Internet Freedom Conference held on September 12th and 13th with the assistance of OTF and Radio Free Asia. Malule Gonzalez and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting put on a very successful conference supporting the right for citizens on the island of Cuba to access the internet freely. So, Malule, can you give a brief report on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, CEO Lancy. We're pleased to report that, yes, we had a very successful conference, and history was made in many ways. For the governor's convenience, we already distributed a package with materials from the conference and the CIMA report that was released at CIF. The same information, it's available to the general public through martinoticias.com and through the Marti's YouTube channel. The CIF conference brought together independent journalists, bloggers, developers, and activists from Cuba and from other parts of the world around the challenge of connecting Cuba to the Internet. The event had many crucial moments that made headlines, such as the participation of a Cuban dissident through a live connection from Cuba using the chat application IMO, the session with Alan Gross discussing Internet freedom as a universal right, and the closing with a groundbreaking Q&A session with all the panelists from Cuba, taking the stage to share personal insights from the island. We have prepared a video presentation that shows this and other important moments that took place during CIF.
For the first time ever, South Florida is playing host to a group of innovators and independent journalists hoping to connect to Cuba.
Y la gran apertura ha sido un evento dedicado a la Internet en Cuba.
Today also marks the beginning of a campaign that brings to light Cubans' desire to access the free internet. Let's take a look at the new campaign.
Lo que pienso, lo que siento,
lo que quiero, lo que hago,
lo que pasa en mis calles, lo que pasa en mi barrio.
Internet, mis derechos. Internet para todos.
Proclaiming today, as part of the two-day conference, the day of the Office of Cuba Broadcasting in the city of Miami.
El gobierno cubano sigue viendo Internet como un campo de batalla contra el imperialismo y no como una oportunidad de desarrollo, de bienestar y de buena vida para los cubanos.
Hay una aspiración muy natural que tenemos todos, que es poder acceder y tenerlo en la casa, que sea un derecho como ha sido refrendado por la Organización de Naciones Unidas.
El paquete es de suma importancia para el pueblo porque viene, Karen, informaciones que no tenemos a primera mano en nuestros canales de televisión cubanos.
While we were doing this, we started to receive a lot of questions in Facebook and Twitter, and actually from Cuba, questions about, guess what, Connectify.
I don't think you can download democracy. I think it has to be uploaded.
The genie's out of the bottle. I think that there's no going back. They've gotten a taste of what when we say power, information is power.
My ability to participate in this conference is wonderful. It's just wonderful. This is a return on my investment in Cuba. Thank you.
Day one wraps up with electric energy, the buzzwords download democracy, dictators divide, hope for tomorrow. Michelle Gillen, CBS 4 News.
So basically, during the 2 day of sessions, we presented 2 keynote speakers, 10 sessions, and launched a documentary on the topic and an awareness campaign that is now scheduled and running on social media. We have more than 50 presenters. 25 of these came from the island and provided insightful information. We had full attendance and an impressive national and international media coverage. A report of the clippings are available also on our Facebook page, Cuba Internet Freedom. CIF is the first initiative done under OCB's Internet Freedom Strategy and under the umbrella of the newly created BBG Office of Internet Freedom. We're very proud that the event touched upon the 5 pillars of CEO Lansing's strategic priorities, showing shift to digital, support to the Internet freedom approach, synergy among the platforms as we work directly with RFA, OTF, and the Internet Freedom Office, and the impact stories were beyond expectations. We have a quote, an NBC quote, and many other re-quoted, posted. The message at the first Cuba Internet Freedom Conference held in Miami by the Office of Cuba Broadcasting is clearly that Cuba must enter the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Malule. Speaking of Internet freedom, the board a year ago, under the leadership of Governor Armstrong and Governor Cornblue, directed the BBG to develop an office for Internet freedom to manage the work that we're doing in making grants to developing Internet freedom tools. And in standing up that office, I was fortunate to find an exceptionally qualified and talented executive to run the Office of Internet Freedom. His name is Dr. Neke Nweke, with more than 15 years of experience in information and communications technology. Recently served as branch chief in the Office of Engineering and Technology at the FCC. Before that, he worked as a senior engineer in the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau of the FCC for cybersecurity and communications reliability. He's a senior staff member of the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, a technical specialist, patent agent for a Washington, D.C. law firm is in his background, research engineer at the National Security Agency. So he holds a PhD in electrical engineering and is a lawyer. He's only been on the job a little over a month, but Dr. Nweke has already hit the ground running, and I'd like to ask him to give you a preview of his Internet freedom vision and strategy. Nake?
Thank you, Mr. Lansing. Consistent with the mission of BBG, the objective of the Office of Internet Freedom is to provide anti-censorship tools and services to citizens and journalists around the world so that they can share online information safely without fear of repression and surveillance. When I first came on board, one of the very first tasks I had to do was put together a strategy that will help advance BBG's internet freedom activities. And in doing that, it required that I understand the scope of BBG's internet freedom activities to date, and not only BBG but also other relevant agencies that we work with. And I proceeded with having numerous meetings that included the board and CEO, senior staff members, the Office of the General Counsel, Anti-Censorship Division here at BBG, the Open Technology Fund, and leadership of all the 5 networks, and also met with the U.S. Department of State, specifically DRL, and Office of International Religious Freedom. And that allowed me to put together a strategy that I believe is very reasonable and will allow us to move our efforts forward in a positive direction. So during those discussions, 3 issues stood out. And one is the status, understanding the status of BBG's internet freedom activities so far. And what I'm currently working on is to put together a report that captures that, and that will be due to the board by March of 2017. And then following that, second thing that stood out was the issue of metrics. And I've been working together with the Open Tech Fund to come up with the reasonable metrics to measure how well the tools that we deploy are doing. And that and we've made progress so far, and that will also be reported to the board once that's completed. And also, we're also working on safeguards against illicit use of BBG's tools. And while not possible to ensure that tools that are made available to the general public for free will not get into the wrong hands, we are committed to coming up with seeking means to at least ensure that the risk associated with that is mitigated. And this, again, we will also be reporting to the board once that exercise is completed. So beyond the 3 areas of priority, additional things that I have here, my strategies, building a database that will track and capture all internet freedom activities that BBG internet freedom activities, so that we'll be able to understand and follow what's happening around the world. And once one goes to that database, and this will be updated on a periodic basis. Another is engaging in education and awareness campaign. Considering the high-speed internet service and broadband deployment is increasing around the world, it's important that we engage in educating the people that we serve to understand the rights to access the internet and also understand the threats associated with it. And then following that is also that we would like to forge partnerships and collaboration with other agencies and also the private sector. They face the same challenges we do, and we would like to be able to share information and also understand the tools they have and be able to kind of leverage each other's tools and also ideas. And I think that will help all of us achieve a whole lot more. And the last thing I have here is also being able to continue to report to the board as they see fit, annual reports or semi-annual reports, and definitely take recommendations from the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Nake. Appreciate it. Questions? All right. So sticking with the subject of internet freedom, but now from the angle of how we cover internet repression and freedom around the world. As the board knows, we've been working with the ICC to become a more collaborative group of 5 networks when it makes sense to be collaborative. You'll see examples of that with Current Time, for example. But what we've never done is a global project involving all 5 entities. And so the entities themselves came to me with the idea that they would put together a global project on covering the story of internet repression and internet freedom. It's a group effort, and it was put together by the managing editors of the 5 entities, including Param Panadurai at RFA, Kathleen Moore at RFERL, Oscar Rodriguez at OCB, Fatwa Masad at MBN, and Clara Dominguez, who is here at Voice of America. It also included Deidre Klein, MBN Director of Communications, and Amy Katz, VOA Coverage Editor. I'm very impressed with this group and with this project they're laying out, and so I've invited Clara Dominguez, representing the whole group, to give you a brief explanation of this project, what its ambitions are, what its timeline is, and what your aspirations for its success may be. So please go ahead, Clara.
Well, thank you very much. And as you said, John, this is really a collaborative project. This is the result of a biweekly meeting of all the content managing editors from all the entities. It's a really good opportunity for all of us to talk about issues that, that we share, and to learn from each other and to share content from each other. So this is really where the idea came from, and the project itself is a series of multimedia presentations that are focusing on internet freedom and the experience of individuals who, using online tools, create a different narrative, offer a new vision, organize, influence public opinion, propel change. So basically, this first section is 7 sections, and there's going to be also an addendum that will explore 1 or 2 topics, case studies, and the aim is really to engage, to promote discussion and interaction, and how internet freedom is affecting people's lives. So we have from Radio Free Asia. Radio Free Asia is going to feature the China Digital Times, and this independent media organization brings uncensored news and online voices from China to the world. And it's a detailed profile of the group showcasing its strategy to expose the hidden mechanisms of China's state censorship. And next, we have RFA, by the way, is also compiling an addendum on circumvention tools. So the Voice of America's News Center and the Voice of America's Somali Service is going to focus on social media and mobile use in Somalia. Somalia is a nation that, as we all know, is enduring conflict and violence, and many people, especially young people, have taken to social media to navigate dangers, to advance education, to manage finances, as well as to really connect, not only locally, but also internationally. So this is going to be the collaboration from the Voice of America. MBN, we have Changing Lives, which is from Tunisia, Egypt, and Yemen. We explore here how social platforms harnessed during the Arab Spring are being used today. And in addition, MBN is also going to focus on how governments are increasingly weary of internet access. So they block certain services or order blackouts, claiming public security concern. So we have governments in Turkey and Egypt, for example, that have blocked social media applications in recent years. So Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, how messaging apps circumvent authoritarian governments. Viber in Russia, WeChat in China are becoming the go-to sites for political discourse, especially among young people. And in addition to that, the rise of fake news and how Russia is using it to undermine the West, also part of the RFERL section. So platforms such as WordPress, Russia is setting up fake news sites targeting not just the United States, but also Central Europe. And the Office of Cuba Broadcasting is going to feature Adictos to iPhone, a group in Cuba that provides users with service and tools to enhance mobile connection in the island. So this is a brief overview of the project that we will hope to have in about 4 to 6 weeks. Thank you.
So, Clara, there was a lot of excitement about that one slide you showed of the fake and the true plug going into the back of the TV. Yeah. Did we create that here, or where'd we get that?
RFERL.
All right, Tom. Well, you did that yourself, Tom? Yeah. Speaking of, thank you, Clara. Well done. Great job. Truth be told, this was all Clara's idea. She just didn't want me to tell anybody that. So, speaking of RFERL, Tom Kent is just about honing in on his 100th day. And we had a chance to talk about this a little bit in the briefing earlier, but I thought it'd be good in the public meeting, Tom, to hear your vision for RFERL after your first 100 days and a sense of how things are going there and what you see for the future. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. RFERL for 93 days. I continue to be impressed every day by the dedication of our staff and the size of our audience. RFERL operates in 26 languages for the Balkans, the former Soviet Union, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Our mission statement makes clear that we stand for freedom of expression and the rule of law, against corruption and extremism. We carry out this mission through professional journalism. In reaching our audiences, we're what journalists call platform agnostic. We'll use whatever methods work best to reach our audience. At the very start of our existence, it was leaflets on balloons, so we're not picky. Now we're on radio, TV, websites, mobile apps, and social networks. Last month, people watched our YouTube videos 26 million times, more than double the number of views a year ago. We have 33 million visitors a month to our own websites and 21 million engaged users on Facebook. The reason our work wins so much attention is that we provide local news in countries where press freedom is absent or still developing. We expose false and destructive narratives, but hardly spend all our time in a defensive mode just reacting to distortions by others. We do our own reporting, much of it investigative. We talk about the impact of dictatorship, corruption, and extremism on the lives of ordinary people. This can require a good deal of bravery on the part of our correspondents, the vast majority of them local citizens, who face down pressure from officials, oligarchs, and thugs. Chairman Schell cited earlier the price some of our journalists have paid. Some countries allow us to be part of their domestic media. We're widely broadcast on local radio and television in places like Georgia, Armenia, Moldova, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, and Afghanistan. Other regimes find us a threat and try to blot us out, jamming our radio and television, trying to block us on the internet. But blocking us out is harder and harder as the world becomes ever more connected. There's usually a way around, not only through our own efforts, but because our audience is willing to take time and take risks to get to us by one means or another. Meanwhile, RFERL is not just about today's news. We set an example of what professional journalism is, with a long-range impact on the countries we serve. RFERL staff routinely lecture at journalism schools. We welcome local interns into our bureaus. So often when I meet high-ranking journalists in one country or another, they say how many skills they learned from listening to RFERL, or, in many cases, that years ago they worked for us, absorbing our practices and ethics. We've moved aggressively into digital news channels to make sure we're reaching young people now in their formative years, and the BBG Social Media Summit will play a great role in upping our game even more on social networks. And all of this explains why it is such an honor to serve as president of RFERL. Our staff is courageous and forward-looking, our content so valuable that audiences seek it out by any means. I look forward to further developing RFERL for all our audiences and to defending our mission and our people.
Thank you very much, Tom. We're glad you're on board. Yep.
So, John, you and Tom know this, but you talked about social networks. The largest social network for video is YouTube. And as you guys know, the president of YouTube, Robert Kinsel, is actually born in Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia at the time, behind the Iron Curtain, and actually grew up learning English, listening to RFERL. So, family still lives in Prague, and so the head of the largest video social network there is eager to help us with our mission. Kind of comes full circle from his childhood. So, let's take advantage of that.
Absolutely.
We're going to be seeing him in just a little while in Prague.
So turning to our social media summit that Tom just mentioned that was held yesterday, if you recall the 5 strategic priorities for the agency, number 1 is a dramatic shift to social, mobile, digital platforms. We had a panel discussion on this in our April board meeting, and we planned, much like our Impact Summit back in February, we planned to have a summit meeting around all the work we're doing on social and mobile platforms for a couple of reasons. Number 1 is to elevate and illustrate the idea of what's being done and develop a baseline, a sort of an expectation of what a minimum expectation would be for all of our entities, but also to connect the idea of shifting to where our audience are shifting with the idea of impact. So it's really it's a connection to the Impact Summit as well. So I've asked Sandy Sugawara, who was on the committee that formed the agenda for yesterday's summit, to give you a summary of the summit. And then after that, Sonia Glokal will connect the summit from Impact to the summit on social media platforms. So, Sandy?
Thank you. Yes, yesterday's social media summit was really terrific. People had so many good ideas about how to move us into the digital age and a host of things we should be doing differently. I'll give you a very brief rundown of some of the good ideas that came out. Number 1, they said we need content built specifically for social. Too many times they're still asked to push out content that's been designed for TV or the websites. Sometimes video that's designed for Facebook won't really do that well, say on Snapchat or Instagram. And social media content, that's designed for like Facebook doesn't do that well on chat apps. So they were very united in the idea that we need to think about specific content for social media. There are different ways you can do that. You could change the workflow, and you could change job descriptions. There are also some simpler ways, and RFERL had, I think, a really great idea. Their digital editor says that before any reporter goes out on a big story, they talk to that reporter about the number of platforms that they can distribute that story on, and if they want to do well on those platforms, what that content should look like. Number 2, audience is key. And of course, to many of you in other media companies, that might sound obvious, but especially in digital, focusing is so important. The strategy needs to really focus on the audience in that market. Newsrooms need to know what platforms are about to take off in their countries or even in their cities. They need to be poised to jump on that. That means getting trained on that. It means knowing what kind of content is needed for that platform. We had several examples of region-specific strategies. Just a couple in Iran. The chat app Telegram is enormously popular. So VOA Persia is experimenting with pushing stories aggressively on Telegram. The Saudis are one of the top users of Snapchat in the world. So MBN is looking at how they can get a prime position on Snapchat. Number 3, the key to successful video on social media is good storytelling. And again, many of them had stories about how people were trying to create viral videos. And really, that's a bad approach, that the best social media videos often have an emotional hook. They tell important, impactful stories. And one participant had a great quote: "Empathy is the single biggest driver of views on Facebook." Number 4, cultural changes will be needed. A lot of the journalists, the digital journalists there, talked about, both publicly and privately, about how most of the entities still haven't made the shift to digital. They're still thinking in terms of broadcasts and even web instead of social. So I think that more digital journalists should be involved in coverage decisions. We need to encourage a willingness to take risks. And we do need to think about new workflows and new job descriptions. Number 5, we need to think about metrics differently. With the market so fragmented and with each platform giving different metrics, so the metrics you can get from Facebook are very different than the ones you get from YouTube or from Snapchat or from Telegram or other chat apps. Different things were talked about. One of them was having, every time you try a new platform, figuring out what would be considered success and what would be considered failure, and when you pull out and when you double down. Lastly, I think that everyone felt that this summit really showed the value of collaboration. I could actually see the relief on people's faces when I didn't know you were. I could actually see the relief on people's faces when they heard that other people were having similar problems to them. And people came up to me and said, "Well, so-and-so had a great idea, and I'm going to steal that idea." I think that in an organization like ours, where we have so many newsrooms with so many smart people, but each newsroom isn't like hugely staffed. It's important that we collaborate and we learn from each other's failures and successes. And those are the main points that came up.
Thank you, Sandy. And then following up on that, we'll invite Sonia up to talk about connecting all of this to impact. Impact is the 5th of the 5 strategic pillars, but in my mind it's the most important, because if we don't have impact, then why are we here? So take it away, Sonia.
Indeed. Thank you, John. I'm here to report to you today on how we moved from the Impact Summit that was held back in February to actually implementing the BBG Impact Model. We are doing so in 4 different areas. The first one is communications, and we work with public affairs to hold a series of meetings with the interagency community to gather feedback and to refine the impact model. And this has actually already paid off the effort, because in this year's Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy report, we not only made the top 10 list, but in fact the impact model was one of the things mentioned under the top 3 spots. So. But going back to the different areas, the other area that we are rolling out the impact model is reporting on impact. We have now integrated all impact model indicators into our internal survey reporting, and we are also on track of providing everything that is required in the PAR report this year. Then, in terms of a topic near and dear to my heart as a researcher of redesigning the research program for enhanced impact tracking. We have redesigned the BBG questionnaire to capture all the impact model indicators. We have also, and that follows up very closely on what Sandy had just mentioned about the metrics, we have, in fact, just yesterday concluded the acquisition of a social media tracking tool that allows us to compare the social media efforts across the entire BBG, not only to ourselves, but also to other international media organizations for benchmarking purposes. We have also commissioned very specific impact studies, and one that we are all looking forward to receiving in the near future. The results is one on BBG Russian language digital impact. I assume all the governors will also be interested in those results. But as we look forward in the FY17 research plan, we are paying even greater emphasis to impact tracking. And briefly on impact in strategic planning, the annual strategy process requires us to set goals and tactics for all of our language services. And this year, we require that all targets that are later on at the end of the next fiscal year used to assess if we've met our goals or not come straight from the impact model. This is a rather massive undertaking with not only hundreds of goals, but each goal has then several targets associated with it. And I just have two for you here to illustrate. One is from Iraq. That's an MBN goal. And here you can see that the goal itself is to address sources of violent extremism and to engage in Iraqi influentials and those potentially vulnerable to extremist propaganda. And you can see in those three targets, which are all taken straight from the impact model, that we are very specific in those targets and also very data-driven. Now, as you know, the world is not the same everywhere, and we cannot get this kind of representative data out of every country. And so here's a completely different goal. This example is from RFA for North Korea, where RFA sets the goal of being an authoritative source of news about North Korea. And here we are looking at a completely set of impact model indicators, such as news pickups in international media and traveler surveys, which are not representative, but nonetheless a very important source of information of those areas, where we would want to set the goal of 1 in 2 outside being one of the top radio stations. And that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Sonia. Any questions, comments? Okay, that's our report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Wow. Any governors have any comments?
In general, yeah. I want to make a closing comment.
Go ahead, Matt. Why don't you jump in?
All right. So, thank you for the presentations. This is sort of a bookend. Jeff riffed at the beginning of the meeting about emoted. At the beginning of the meeting, how things have changed so dramatically. And so, in a way to bookend this, I want to echo that the public presentations that we've had today, and then the private conversations we've had, not just today, but over the period of a long period of time now. John, your leadership has been terrific. Amanda and Tom, the way that this agency and the entities have just come around. We don't get out there and crow about the change that's coming. We demonstrate by what has been changed, and you're demonstrating by the increased quality of product and effort and the morale that's going up. It's so impressive, and so I just wanted to echo Jeff's emoting. Is that what it was? Yeah. Emoting. Okay. And the professional journalism, and I have a master's in public diplomacy. I was in an oversight position, and yet it wasn't until I came onto this board that I actually understood what this agency was about and what our mission was and how we achieve impact, which falls on Sonia's presentation. And so I'm so impressed with what we're doing. We have a long way to go, but there's so much potential here, and there's so much actual impact that we're having. I'm just really proud, John, of what you've achieved, and it just helps rationalize why the board exists, to provide you a political insulation to prevent the politicization of this agency. So kudos to you, and this is just a remarkable place.
Thank you, Governor Armstrong, and I have a great team that does all the work. So thank you very much.
Good emoting, Matt. Any other? I mean, we could talk about any of these presentations for hours. It really was impressive. Any other comments from the board? I know we've had a long day. Anybody? Any further comments? Mr. Crock, Ambassador.
Yeah. So countering violent extremism has tied us up in knots in this country. Have we substantially surveyed Middle Eastern or East Asian Muslims to actually verify that any reference to Islam or Islamism has a negative effect on perceptions? I mention this because I'm old enough to have gone through another wave of Middle Eastern terror brought to you by the Palestinian Fedayeen groups. Everybody, including the Arabs, talked about Palestinian terror. So as we have this, angels dancing on heads of pins kind of, I just wonder, have we broadly surveyed opinion in the area?
From the BBG standpoint, as far as I know, we have not done that. There's some literature out there on the topic. And if I understand the question, there are people who believe that, there are mixed opinions about whether the whole problem of extremism is caused by religion or not religion. There was a study done recently in Iraq by Mercy Corps that conclusively showed that it was the opposite. It was grievance against the government.
Yeah, I'm on the Mercy Corps board, and a lot of effort into that just for those reasons. So I'm sorry that Rick Stingle isn't here. I don't know if State is...
Yeah, I was just actually looking over my shoulder while you were talking to ask Josh and Ben and my colleagues back here. But I think it's something probably offline we should interface with State, and if we haven't or if they haven't, and looking, Sonia, at you too down there. Go ahead, Sonia.
Well, I was just going to say, it is really the intersection between our BBG surveys, which are mainly media-focused, but we do certainly ask certain opinion questions, but really State's program is much more robust when it comes down to just opinions.
It's really pretty simple. It's a question in the region, does the phrase Islamic terrorism or Islamic extremism offend you as a Muslim, right? Because the vast majority of Muslims are not extreme, and the vast majority of most people are not extreme. So I think we ought to maybe John offline interface with State Department. It would be shocking if nobody's done this research, but I haven't seen it anywhere. So maybe we should get some money and go do it. So maybe Sonia, if you and Brian and State could Josh could do this. Sonia's all for getting the money. If anybody didn't hear that. Great comment, Brian. It'd be nice. That would be a nice, simple thing to try to test that nobody seems to have answered for 5 years. So, any other comments, Michael, Ken? No. Okay. Let me go back to my language. I'm a little bit kind of blown away by the meeting today, so I'll read this boilerplate. We're going to hold our next board meeting here at the headquarters of the BBG on December 1st, 2016, when we'll have a new president-elect, as shocking as that sounds. And although still the same president in office for one more BBG board meeting. I'll work closely with my fellow governors and CEO John Lansing to develop the agenda. And if any governors have suggestions or comments or things they'd like to include in the agenda, please let me know. Any other items for discussion? Looking around, no. Anybody want to move that we adjourn? Move Matt Armstrong before I finish. Anybody second? Ken Weinstein ready to go as well. Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful meeting and all the hard work. I know a lot goes into this, so thank you, everybody.
Thank you.